Hi. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Then we activate Article 7.
So we have one battalion from the US defending another day. And the Prime Minister is really trying to. She's sort of meeting with a lot just to show that we have some friends, but otherwise, because you know, we have some possibilities. And what they bring that, they don't want to be 85% are against you, so they get rid of it.
6% completely positive.
But for us, the problem is that they are willing to be independent. And our viewers don't want to be they want them to be part. So I think that we have to develop this peaceful escape in some way. Maybe take back some more competences, but still has a real between the Faroe Islands, Greenland, so that he didn't go to the dinner?
So this is something also because I need to say this because
Good morning. The sitting is open. I remind members that they should insert their badge before taking the floor. As you begin your speech, dear colleagues, please press the microphone request button once only, wait a couple of seconds, and then start your speech. The first item of business this morning is a debate under urgent procedure on opinion on a draft convention for the protection of the profession of lawyer, document 16094 and document 16102, presented by Mr. Vladimir Vardanyan on behalf of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights. He will then have a statement from the right, we will then have a statement from the Right Honourable Lord Hermer, who is with us today, and whom I met a couple of months ago in Venice. Lord, I want to thank you for being with us, and we're going to share your wise advices. Lord Hermer is Attorney-General for England and Wales and Advocate General for Northern Ireland. In order to finish by 10:15 a.m., I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 10:14 a.m. to allow time for the reply and the votes. I call now Mr. Vardanyan, Rapporteur. Dear Vladimir, as you know, you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes at the end to reply to the debate. You have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, on 17 December 2024, the Committee of Ministers transmitted to the Assembly a draft Council of Europe Convention for the protection of the profession of lawyers, prepared by the Committee of Experts on the Protection of Lawyers and the European Committee on Legal Cooperation. We committed to giving our statutory opinion as soon as possible, but this doesn't mean that drafting was swift and straightforward. This draft text is the culmination of the process that began in 2018 with the adoption by this Assembly of recommendation, the case for drafting a European Convention on the profession of lawyer. I want to congratulate the Committee of Experts on the Protection of Lawyers and the European Committee on Legal Cooperation for their excellent work and for putting together an instrument that reconciles and differentiates between very different legal systems. The draft convention provides structured legal protection for lawyers, ensuring they can practice their profession without fear of discrimination, improper hindrance, or interference. This is critical not only for the safety and independence of lawyers, but also for the maintaining public confidence in the judiciary and the rule of law. It ensures that those tasked with defending our rights are adequately protected. The need for this convention arises from a stark and unsettling reality. Lawyers who are pivotal in upholding the rule of law and ensuring justice are increasingly becoming targets of harassment, intimidation, and sometimes even violence. This is not limited to any single country, region, or legal system. It is a widespread issue that threatens the very foundations of our democratic societies. Consider the case of Vadim Kobzev, Igor Serguin, and Alexei Lipster were arrested in October 2023 on charges on participation in an extremist organization and convicted to 5.5 years imprisonment in a sham trial. Maxim Znak, a prominent Belarusian lawyer, was sentenced to 10 years in a penal colony in September 2021 just because he contested the results of election of Alexander Lukashenko. These examples are emblematic in a broader crisis where lawyers face severe repercussions simply for fulfilling their professional duties. More than 1,700 lawyers have been prosecuted in Turkey on vague charges related to the terrorism following the 2016 coup attempt. In the United Kingdom and Germany, lawyers have faced threats to their safety merely for their involvement in the high-profile or politically sensitive cases. These examples further underscore the urgent need for a robust, binding international instrument to protect lawyers wherever they may practice. One of the key benefits of this draft convention is that it establishes standards that are further reaching than those existing in the current soft law instruments, including the Committee on Minister Recommendation on the freedom of exercise of the profession of lawyer. It introduces strong professional rights for the lawyers, including the right to freely exercise their profession, choose their clients, and communicate confidentially with them. It will protect not only licensed lawyers, but also those unlawfully deprived of the right to practice. It will also apply to authorized representatives of applicants before international courts and human rights protection bodies, pragmatically safeguarding a wider range of legal offenders. Furthermore, the Convention established legal standards for the functioning of professional associations of lawyers as independent and self-governing bodies. This is particularly significant because such associations play a crucial role in defending the integrity of the legal profession and ensuring that the rights of their members are protected. Perhaps most importantly, the Convention provides for establishment of a robust monitoring mechanism, the Group of Experts on the Protection of Professional Lawyers, GRAVO, will oversee the implementation, ensuring that its provisions are upheld and any violation of systematic threats and properly addressed. Colleagues, the only amendments which I decided to propose deal with reservation. Under international law, reservations are permitted unless prohibited by the treaty or when they would be incompatible with its object or purpose. The Committee of Experts on the Protection of Lawyers explicitly intended for the Convention to be fully implemented without reservation, as highlighted in their meeting report from May 2024. If we allow states to formulate reservation upon signing or ratifying the Convention, it may weaken the overall impact of this critical instrument. Members of this Assembly, this is imperative that we take this opportunity to improve the protection for one of the most vulnerable yet vital components of our justice system. By approving this opinion, we make a resounding commitment to uphold human rights, democracy, and the rule of law, and protect those who defend it. Thank you.
Thank you, Vladimir. I would now like to welcome the Right Honourable Lord Hermer, who is, as I said earlier, Attorney-General for England and Wales and Advocate General for Northern Ireland, to make a statement. Lord Hermer, you have the floor.
Thank you, President. Thank you, President, and may I congratulate you on your re-election. It's an immense privilege to have the opportunity to address you all this morning. And it's an honour to open this debate on the draft Council of Europe Convention for the protection of the profession of lawyer. And I understand the initial idea for this hugely important convention came from PACE, and I say with great respect, it's an excellent example of where PACE, the Secretariat and member states' governments can work together to deliver important standards that we should all abide by. For our part, the United Kingdom, and indeed the legal professions within the United Kingdom, welcome the finalisation of the proposed convention, and we congratulate all of those involved for their careful and effective work that has led to this really significant achievement. Now, when thinking about opening this debate on the genesis of this convention and the protection that it affords to lawyers, I couldn't help but be drawn to one of William Shakespeare's most famous lines. It's a line taken from Shakespeare's 1591 play, Henry VI, Part 2. It's spoken by a character called Dick the Butcher, one of a group of rebels seeking to foment rebellion and overthrow the king and lawful government. And it reads this: "The first thing we'll do, let's kill all the lawyers." Now, at its most basic, that line has often been seen as criticism of lawyers. In Henry VI, the rebels were of the view that lawyers were upholding the status quo and the interests of a narrow section of society. That's not how I read it. I read those lines less as criticism of lawyers, but a recognition, even as early as 1591, of the importance of the role of independent lawyers as guardians of freedom and democratic values. After all, it was the rebels in Henry VI who wanted to get rid of the lawyers. This convention will rightly send a strong signal that the international community takes seriously the independence of the legal profession and the rights of lawyers to practice free of interference and harassment. And our collective legal systems work best in circumstances where advocates are able to take their own cases without fear or favour and represent clients irrespective of their own views as to what the client did, whether it was morally right or morally wrong. And this convention has a particular resonance for me, as I've worked with organisations for many years that seek to protect lawyers working in fragile environments outside of the Council of Europe. I've seen how lawyers themselves become targets, including assassinations of many people known to organisations that I've worked with and supported. But it's all too easy to think that those fragile environments only exist elsewhere outside of the Council of Europe. But of course, these fragile environments exist far closer to home. In the summer of last year, I visited Southport, a town some 17 miles north of Liverpool in England, following the tragic murders of 3 young girls at a Taylor Swift-themed dance class. During that visit, I met with police, prosecuting authorities, and the wider community devastated by the murders and the public disorder that rose around it. But I also met asylum advice lawyers whose offices were targeted and then closed and boarded up during the violent disorder that followed the murders. Whilst their work was entirely unrelated to the events that took place in Southport, those lawyers were targeted precisely because of the advice they were giving and the clients they represented. And as a result of the actions of a small minority, those lawyers couldn't practice, they couldn't attend their offices, and those clients for whom their advice mattered so much were denied the rights and protections afforded by law. So now, 430 years after Shakespeare's play, we recognise, cherish and protect the fundamental role that lawyers play in our society. I would also, President, wish to take this opportunity to address PACE on the United Kingdom's government's approach to the rule of law, and within that, the European Convention on human rights, and the crucial role of parliamentarians in upholding both societies. Can I, at the outset, reiterate the United Kingdom government's commitment to the values of democracy, of human rights, and of the rule of law, the core values that underpin this great organisation. And I am grateful for PACE's work in delivering this throughout Europe. The rule of law for the United Kingdom government acts as our guiding principle. It provides the foundation for our economy, for our legal sector, and for the freedoms which allow people to interact with each other in their day-to-day lives. In October of last year, I had the honour of delivering a lecture in the name of Tom Bingham, one of our great post-war judges. In that lecture, I drew on his well-known conception of the rule of law, which recognises that international law is the rule of law writ large, and that states must comply with their international law obligations. There is one thing I think that everybody in this room will agree on, and that is that we are living through uncertain and indeed challenging times. And sadly, we are witnessing threats to the rule of law across several fronts in Europe, from democratic backsliding, disinformation, and the diminishing checks and balances on executive action. And it is my view that our democracies need to take immediate steps to build and secure the rule of law's long-term resilience in the face of these threats, both known and unknown, in both our domestic and our international systems. We must proactively promote a rule of law culture amongst the public, not least young people, seeking to use it to rebuild trust in our democratic institutions by explaining how the rule of law serves all of us. And as parliamentarians, we have a special duty to uphold and promote the rule of law in everything that we do. This Assembly has been at the forefront globally of recognising that in democracies, national parliaments are important guarantors of the rule of law and human rights, and have a crucial role to play in legitimating the institutions on which those fundamental values depend, ensuring that the checks and balances on executive action are meaningful, scrutinising draft laws to ensure they are compatible with the minimum requirements of the rule of law and human rights, monitoring the response of governments to court judgments, including the judgments of the European Court of Human Rights in respect to the United Kingdom and others, to make sure they are implemented, discussing and deciding what the appropriate responses should be, designing institutions such as the Parliamentary Human Rights Committees, which help national parliaments perform these important functions and ensure that there is meaningful and properly informed democratic debate about what these foundational commitments require. So the story that we must all tell is how the rule of law matters, how it matters for growth, for jobs, for people's livelihoods, how it impacts upon the pound or the euro in their pocket, and on the type of future that their and our children deserve to enjoy. Governments that undermine or take a pick and mix approach to these values act in disservice to us all and disincentivise a flourishing economy for all. Now, I'm proud to say that since taking office, this new United Kingdom government has taken steps to uphold our obligations and the international rules-based system. We've made plain our commitment to our cornerstone international institutions, including the Council of Europe and the European Court of Human Rights, the International Criminal Court and the International Court of Justice, taking positive steps to promote their importance and rebuild respect for them. And as we approach the 35th anniversary of the Venice Commission, I commend it for its great work, bringing us together and through constructive dialogue, addressing profound social changes such as globalization and technological advancements, which can undermine democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. And turning, if I may, to the European Convention on Human Rights. This new United Kingdom government is fully committed to the Convention and upholding the international human rights framework. As party to the Convention, recommitted to it in the Reykjavik Declaration, the Convention system is the cornerstone of the Council of Europe's protection of human rights. In doing so, the Convention underlines the importance of the principle of subsidiarity and the margin of appreciation for the implementation of the Convention at the national level by the contracting parties. And if I may, I'd like to be very clear. The new United Kingdom government will never withdraw from the European Convention on Human Rights, or refuse to comply with judgments of the court, or requests for interim measures given in respect of the United Kingdom. The Convention was opened for signature on the 4th of November 1950 in Rome. The United Kingdom signed it on this date and was the first state to ratify the Convention in March of 1951. I was also reminded, coming into this building this morning, that two of the founding figures of the Council of Europe were British, Winston Churchill and Ernest Bevin. And indeed, it is important to remember when we talk about the Convention, and indeed the Treaty of London, that we remember the fundamental reasons why it came into existence and why it was needed. What it was that those founders wanted. Because the Convention, arising as it did from the ashes of the Second World War, was a victory for certain basic values. Values that were the cornerstones not merely of Western civilization, but of civilization as such. The purpose of the Convention would be to protect those values, to prevent Europe returning to war, but also to protect the rights of individuals and to protect minorities against misrule by the majority. So I take this opportunity to pay tribute to the Council of Europe for all that it has done. And today I pay particular tribute for the work that it has done standing in solidarity with Ukraine. And I am delighted that the Ukrainian delegation are with us this morning. Russia's unlawful war of aggression in Ukraine was a repudiation of the very rights and values this organization was created to protect and defend. And we all stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine. Finally, later this year, we will celebrate the 75th anniversary of the Convention, and we will have an opportunity to celebrate the enormous contributions of the Council of Europe, which of course celebrated its own 75th anniversary last year, and to take the opportunity together to reaffirm the core values of the organisation: protecting human rights, democracy, and the rule of law. President, thank you.
I hope that I will express all members of this assembly by saying that some of your wording were like music in my ears, especially at these crucial times where we have to protect all principles that this Council is built for. I'm really glad and proud that you have connected the works of William Shakespeare with the works of this Assembly, especially today. And of course, I'm glad that the mission of dictating lawyers not completed. Thank you so much for addressing the Assembly. And now I will call for the debate the first speakers on behalf of the political groups. On behalf of the European Conservatives, Sir Edward Lee has the floor.
So, Mr. President, it is true that since Shakespeare's time, we lawyers have had a bad reputation, but of course we are essential to preserve the rule of law in a democratic society. And we see what's going on in Russia with the absurd, ridiculous and horrible persecution and imprisonment of the lawyers that represented Mr. Navalny simply for representing him. So the rule of law is absolutely right, and in those terms I agree with everything that Lord Hermer says. But in looking to the Council of Europe and the Convention, we've got to concentrate on what should be our core task. Indeed, while we were founded in the late 1940s, early 1950s, to fight fascism and communism and totalitarianism. But we see the Convention is often misused. Now, closer to home, Lord Hermer is a very distinguished lawyer. We welcome him to his post, a distinguished private practice. It's very important that when people enter government from the private sector, that they are, of course, fully transparent. Unfortunately, the new government has dropped the case against the Jerry Adams, a client of Lord Hermer. I don't want to make any further comment about it. It just underlines the importance of transparency, and when lawyers from the private sector do enter government, they must recuse themselves from every case that they have been involved in the private sector. Lord Hermer has no doubt also been instrumental in the quite disgraceful attempt by the British government to give away the Diego Garcia and Chagos, a vital military base, vital to NATO, to our American and British interests, and transfer them to an imperial power, Mauritius, letting down the Chagosians who simply want to have self-determination, all in the name of so-called international law. But the International Court of Justice binding was not binding in any sense. It was only an opinion, and we can and should ignore it. Now, in the short time left to me, I want to reply to Lord Hermer about his strong defence of the Convention. The Convention is being misused, and I would like to know how this present government is going to stop criminal gangs taking people, up to 40,000 people every year across the Channel in leaking boats, dozens dying every year. The moment we try and imprison these people or have any kind of deterrent or deport them, human rights lawyers, in the name of the Convention, stop us doing anything. This criminal trade goes on. The fact is that the Convention is being misused. The court has gradually extended its competence to attack democratic governments like the United Kingdom government, who are simply trying to defend their people and prevent illegality. So I put that challenge to Lord Hermer, and I welcome him to our debates. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I call now on behalf of ALDE, Lesia Vasilenko.
Thank you, President, dear colleagues and friends of the Assembly. It is an honor to thank on behalf of the ALDE Group our dear Rapporteur Vladimir Vardanyan for his opinion on this draft convention. The draft convention we see before us has taken in many proposals from this Assembly, and it shall undoubtedly soon become the baseline for protecting the rights of human rights defenders across Europe and, I believe, also in other regions of the world. The legal profession is one of the pillars of a just and democratic societies. Lawyers ensure access to justice, protect fundamental rights, and hold institutions accountable. It is with the help of lawyers that activists for human rights, democracy, and various other causes make the world a better and safer place. It is through the work of lawyers that societies are reminded and harnessed back into the respect for the rule of law. However, in many parts of the world, legal professionals face increasing pressure, intimidation, and even persecution for no other crime than merely doing their job. In Georgia, Belarus, Russia, in occupied territories of Ukraine, under the effective control of Russia, we have legal professionals fighting for the right of human rights defenders and for people wishing to live in the freedom from oppressive regimes. These lawyers are consequently marginalized, targeted, and threatened by these very regimes. They are branded as enemies of the state, they are disbarred, they are thrown into prisons next to their own clients, and they are simply unable to defend themselves. This is not right. Lawyers must be able to work without fear. This convention provides a backbone for legal professionals to fall back on when their own rights are being breached and when they find themselves unable not only to defend their clients, but also to defend themselves. This draft convention sends a clear message that no legal professional should be punished for upholding justice and for just doing his or her job. By adopting and implementing these provisions and by supporting this report in full, as Mr. Vladimir Vardanyan has presented it to us, we are making one step more towards a global society where the rule of law prevails and where legal professionals are protected rather than persecuted. I would encourage the House, this Assembly, to support this report, this legal opinion in full. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the United European Left, Laura Castello.
Thank you, dear Chair. Firstly, I would like to thank the rapporteur for this important opinion, and this draft convention is very well needed, taking into account increasing attacks targeting lawyers. Dear colleagues, let me focus on an important point. This convention contains no specific provisions on the use of secret surveillance, including spyware as Pegasus, against lawyers. And the contradiction between Article 6.3b, which obliges confidential communications with the clients or prospective clients, and the exclusion of this enormous risk posed by these modern secret surveillance tools to practice the profession of lawyer without interference. I do believe that this Assembly should follow the recommendation 2258 of 2023 and propose an addendum to include this matter and in this convention. Otherwise, we are granting the impunity of secret services with the use of spyware, including the threats posed by new technologies. This is paramount on the attorney-client relationship as a necessary guarantee for correct professional practice and due secrecy. If there is no relationship of trust, the professional practice is in danger or even annulled. In this addendum, there should be expressed exclusions covering lawyers. But even in the future European Convention that the Committee of Ministers is preparing on the acquisition, use, sale, and export of spyware, it should be included this exclusion of lawyers and journalists regarding the possibility of using a state espionage or monitoring services. These exclusions should be transferred to the companies or private contractors that assist secret services, police, or government agencies. That is to say, dear members of the Committee of Ministers and dear colleagues, mass surveillance measures should provide list of exclusions. That is to say, companies like NSO could not wash their hands because from a compliance point of view, they should prefer that their products already have these exclusions included. This is the only way. A huge number of Catalans have been targeted by Pegasus spyware, the biggest case, in fact. And prominent lawyers have been infected. And dear colleagues, these practices occur in a democracy, no matter if government is conservative or socialist. If we, as the Assembly of the Council of Europe, considers lawyers as human rights defenders, we, as well, as representative of democracy, rule of law, and human rights, should protect our defenders through real actions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. On behalf of the Socialists, Greens and Democrats, Titus Korlation.
President, distinguished guests, colleagues, on behalf of the Socialist Group, I would like to express a clear and substantial both political and legal support for the adoption of the Convention for the Protection of the Profession of Lawyer during the Luxembourg presidency of the Committee of Ministers, and of course for the adoption of a very good opinion drafted by our colleague rapporteur Vladimir Vardanyan. It's a good draft convention that it's true. It is a result of our specific request of the Assembly already in 2018, the recommendation 2121. I don't want to insist on the important role of the lawyer, a crucial position in the administration of justice, in providing effective representation and necessary legal support and assistance within the society, and as a human rights defender. But I would like to underline that this draft convention, it's a good one because it's providing guarantees for professional rights of the lawyer, a structured legal protection of the profession and the right for practice, and the general protection against attacks, threats, harassments, abuses and intimidation. And indeed, it's the first ever international treaty in this domain. It's a good framework convention, but it's not a perfect one, because just looking at paragraph 12 of the opinion of the rapporteur, we can see once again the lack of provisions concerning the use of the secret surveillance, including spyware. But there is a possibility for management of this topic in the near future. On the other side, I would like to underline the fact that this convention will be in the position to provide concrete solutions to things that happened in the previous years, especially in Central Eastern European countries. There is an old heritage coming from the past communist period that was transferred in modern days. And we saw several cases when at least some prosecutors adopted an abusive conduct against lawyers, going beyond the line that is defined by the law. We also had in Romania a famous case, the young lawyer Robert Roșu, a case that I signaled, if you remember, in this plenary to the previous European Commissioner for Justice, Didier Reynders. And in the end, of course, the judges from the Supreme Court dismissed all the accusations from the prosecutors and underlined the abuses committed by the prosecutors. Dear colleagues, public exposures of lawyers' handcuffs, and while the TV channels are lively broadcasting this thing, this is totally unacceptable. Also, some of our Polish colleagues signaled the fact that in their country there were, for political reasons, situations when lawyers suffered abuses. So, based on that, I tabled an amendment that was adopted by the committee by a majority to cover things which are not explicitly covered by the current draft convention, and I encourage you to support the adoption of this amendment. Well, this will not delay the adoption of the convention, because we already tabled one amendment, and it will follow a fast track, and I encourage the Luxembourg presidency to convince the Committee of Ministers to adopt this amendment and to avoid the previous mistakes when the committee rejected our amendments on the draft convention on artificial intelligence. And we saw just 2 months after that how wrong was the position of the Committee of Ministers. So strong support for the adoption of the convention. Thank you.
Thank you. On behalf of the European People's Party, Octavie Moder.
Thank you, President. And here we are at a remarkable moment, because this European Convention will be a major first and a great stride forward in the administration of justice so that justice can be done. The Council of Europe is an international institution predicated on the rule of law, democracy and human rights. And it is therefore especially fitting for it to be the initiator of a future convention on the protection of the profession of lawyer, to whom I extend my fuller support, and I call for the adoption of the text here. This is a major step towards a common legal area. It will be a major international instrument, the first in this area, and also open to ratification by third-party states, and it will be binding for the signatories. Need one also recall the importance of the role of lawyers in access to justice for citizens appearing before the courts, and I would like to thank and commend Rapporteur Vardanyan for his so pertinent opinion, in which he highlighted the important participation of lawyers in the sound administration of justice. So these defenders of human rights should be protected in the exercise of their profession, because threats and attacks against them, unfortunately, have been increasing in recent years. Nonetheless, it's obvious that they should be able to exercise their profession unfettered and without fear of discrimination in the interest of the protection of people appearing before the courts and the defence of democratic values. And this instrument will allow them to express themselves freely and protect their independence. I'd like to highlight also the important specificities of this new instrument with respect to impartial disciplinary proceedings as a protection against abuse, as well as the establishment of a follow-up mechanism, which is so important to guarantee the effectiveness of the Convention, and which is all too often sorely lacking in other areas. The Council of Europe and its Legal Affairs Committee have worked very fast, and here we should also highlight the work done by Rapporteur Vardanyan. We may also share his position, which should be explicitly included in the text of the Convention, that no reservation will be permitted. Indeed, lodging reservations on specific provisions of the Convention may strip it of its substance. In no case should amendments delay the adoption of the draft European Convention. On the contrary, it's vital for it to come into force as soon as possible, given the upsurge in threats and violence against lawyers, which events which are proliferating, as demonstrated by the thousands of lawyers who've responded to their concern, to this concern, in a survey. We need to strengthen the rule of law and the safeguarding of human rights, and this universal instrument will confirm the trailblazing and protective role of the Council of Europe regarding human rights. Thank you.
Thank you. Agnes Pramer is next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Menschenrechte und Rechtsstaatlichkeit.
Human rights and international law, that's what we do here in this House. And that's all quite right, that this is the fundament, the foundation of our democratic systems. But you don't go to people and ask them if in any way they feel that their rights have been offended, but it is lawyers who are actually the connection, who are the people that make sure that they can defend and implement those rights when faced with the stat. Young lawyers are filled with enthusiasm, and they learn what's necessary, what needs to be done. They learn about what's possible, and they would like to put that into practice. They want to fight for human rights, for the rights of people. There's not very much understanding as well for the fact when there are certain bodies, for example, when there are people who take or try to defend certain causes that are far from them. These young lawyers are often very courageous. They often don't actually know who exactly they're dealing with in their work. And I would like to tell a little personal story as well. When I was a lawyer, I worked for favor of people who were looking for asylum in Austria at a particular point in time when the administration had a task given to them from the government about how many negative answers were required to be given. And at this particular point in time, I did a type of work there that affected me for the rest of that time. At that particular point, there was a particularly normal case that I was working for. There was a amount that I should have had to pay only because of the fact that I defended my client properly and the way that I believed I should have, because on their behalf and in their name I actually demanded and fighted for their rights. And this is something that happened actually in a country like Austria, and this is quite a problem where I filed an appeal and my rights were recognized. And yet, nevertheless, this is something that showed me to what extent it's actually quite important that this protection exists, that this type of protection exists for lawyers
and that it's not just older men somehow who are worrying about the protection of lawyers, but that it's actually an extremely important task that this convention be in place. It's so important because it works with all of these different aspects that I've mentioned, with protection of the lawyers themselves, men and women, but also with the protection of the defense, the actual act of defense itself. Both of those aspects are necessary if we want to maintain the rule of law, which is also necessary on its side to make sure that we can defend people in their foundational and essential rights. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Yuri Kamelchuk is next.
Badges here. Yeah, now it works. Thank you. Mr. President, dear colleagues, I would like to say, start with expression my sincere gratitude to Mr. Vardanyan, the rapporteur of this dedicated work on this crucial issue. The report before us outlines the urgent need to adopt the Council of Europe Convention for the Protection of the Profession of Lawyer. This initiative is not just about legal professionals, it's about safeguarding justice, upholding human rights, and strengthening democratic institutions. Without effective legal protection, the rule of law remains vulnerable to political pressure, repression, and authoritarian expansion. For Ukraine, this matter is of particular importance. Ukrainian lawyers, human rights defenders, and legal professionals have been targeted, especially in the territories occupied by Russia. Many have been subjected to intimidation, arbitrary detention, disbarment, and persecution simply for defending fundamental rights. Their work is essential for ensuring justice not only for political prisoners but also for victims of Russian war crimes. Strengthening international mechanisms to protect lawyers is therefore an essential step toward reinforcing democratic values and accountability. Ukrainian legal professionals operate under unprecedented risks, defending civilians from politically motivated prosecutions, advocating for war crimes, accountability, and representing victims of Russian aggressions. This convention could provide critical legal tools for international advocacy, enabling stronger responses to threats, unlawful arrests, and pressure tactics used by authoritarian regimes. Ukraine's judicial reforms are deeply intertwined with our European inspirations. By supporting this convention, Ukraine reinforces its commitment to the rule of law, judicial independence, and fundamental rights. The convention established clear protection against undue interference in legal practice, which aligns with Ukraine's broader European integration agenda. The persecution of lawyers in Russia, particularly those defending political dissidents, as a well-documented problem. This convention provides a legal instrument to challenge such practices at the international level. Ukraine can leverage this mechanism to expose Russians' violations, hold perpetrators accountable, and support Russian lawyers defending political prisoners, including those who oppose the war against Ukraine. Ukrainian lawyers play a pivotal role in documenting Russian war crimes, preparing legal cases, and supporting international prosecutions. They work on the front lines of justice, collecting evidence, defending victims, and challenging impunity. Strengthening legal safeguards for these professionals is essential for ensuring justice and upholding international legal norms. Thank you.
Thank you. Paweł Zablonski is next.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, I am a lawyer myself, and I can attest to that. Lawyers are under attack. Lawyers are under political attack in Russia, in Belarus, but unfortunately, not just there. Also in the countries that are members of this assembly, we shouldn't be taking anything for granted. And what is even more worrying, these attacks at times come from the political sides that claim to be safeguarding the rule of law. Just last year in Poland, many conservative lawyers, attorneys, that represent members of political opposition have been subject to vicious attacks, political attacks by members of the ruling party and the media that support them. Their professional privilege was challenged, and they have been threatened with criminal proceedings initiated against them. In October, this assembly has been voting on the case of Mr. Romanowski, and since that time, with deep regret, I have to inform you, dear colleagues, that his attorney, Mr. Bartosz Lewandowski has been publicly attacked and threatened by members of the ruling party belonging to the EPP. He was threatened that he should be charged and indicted, just for the fact that he's an attorney that rendered legal assistance to a member of political opposition. And this is not the end, unfortunately, because many judges in Poland right now are being discriminated against. They are being removed from cases, forcibly transferred to special sections that are being created in the courts against their will, against the law. We could compare it to special penal military units. And these special sections are obviously excluded for adjudicating most cases. Just yesterday, such section was created in one of the most important courts of the country, the Appellate Court of Warsaw. This is against the law. This is simply by virtue of administrative, politically motivated decision. And the reason is obvious. The government wants only the judges that they can politically trust. This is a clear violation of judicial independence. This must be denounced. This is just several examples, but there are many others. And these examples are proof that we should never be taking anything for granted, even in democracies. Profession of lawyers, attorneys, prosecutors, judges must be protected, especially against those that proclaim themselves to be those in favor of the rule of law, of democracy, but breach these principles for political gains. Thank you.
Thank you. Stéphane Mazar is next.
Merci, Monsieur le
Thank you, President. Rapporteur, dear colleagues. In a democracy in which the rule of law is a fundamental pillar, the protection of lawyers, which in my country, France, are called officers of the court, is an absolute necessity. Lawyers are the defenders of individual rights. They're also the custodians of justice, the guarantors of fairness, and the protectors of fundamental freedoms. The role of lawyer is essential in guaranteeing for each and everyone a fair trial, a principle enshrined in Article 6 of the European Convention on Human Rights. Without high-quality, independent defence, the accused may be left alone to face the omnipotence of the state, which may jeopardise the very balance of justice. As Robert Badinter stressed, the former Minister of Justice and a great lawyer who devoted his life to the great cause of abolishing the death penalty, defence is an act of courage, a battle for truth and justice. And this battle can only be waged if lawyers are free to exercise their profession without fear of threat, reprisals, pressure or intimidation. And yet, in several European countries, as you recalled, my dear colleague Vladimir Vardanyan, in your report we're examining today, we are witnessing disturbing attacks against the rights to defence and attacks against the lawyers themselves. In Hungary, in Poland under the previous government, in Russia, and very recently with the defense lawyers of Alexei Navalny, lawyers have been threatened, imprisoned, or prevented from representing their clients, particularly in so-called political cases. These attacks are not just violations of the rights of lawyers, they're a direct threat to the rule of law and democracy themselves. The universal scope of the protection of the rights of defence and defenders is an objective which the Council of Europe must shoulder, as examined in this report, because it's the Universal Declaration of Human Rights that says it. Quote, "Everyone is entitled to a fair and public hearing by an independent and impartial tribunal," end quote. And lawyers are the craftsmen and women of this law. Without them, justice becomes a sham, a parody, and democracy becomes an exercise in deceit. Guarantee effective protection for lawyers, as called upon by the work we do in our Assembly, means protecting justice, our freedoms, and protecting democracy. And the Council of Europe should spearhead this battle, seeking each day to support those who are defending the rights of all, often to the peril of their own safety. I therefore commend the finalisation of the draft convention by the Committee of Experts, and let's make this a reality now with universal scope. Thank you.
Thank you. Next is Tony Vaughan.
Thank you, Mr. President. Colleagues, every day lawyers across Europe face mounting pressures simply for doing their jobs. Last year, the Council of Bars and Law Societies of Europe published a report which heard from 15,000 lawyers across Europe. and the testimonies were shocking. Physical attacks on lawyers in Sweden. Criminal lawyers in Denmark warned to avoid certain areas because of the criminal defence work they were engaged in. Immigration lawyers facing death threats, as Lord Hermer referred to, in the UK last summer. In Georgia, lawyers defending protesters have reported systematic persecution. When lawyers are attacked, it is not just our profession that suffers. It's the journalist facing politically motivated prosecution. It's the small business owner challenging overreach by government. It's the person fearing torture if they are deported without due process. Every attack on a lawyer is an attack on somebody's right of access to justice. This convention is a shield to those who defend others. The monitoring mechanisms it creates, like Gravo, give real teeth to investigate and respond when lawyers face threats. The urgent procedure means the authorities can act immediately when our colleagues are in danger. The moment we allow lawyers to be intimidated for who they represent, the minute that we allow lawyers to be identified with the causes of their clients, is the moment that we surrender the rule of law itself. And I should say something about the attacks on the European Court itself for overreach, for activism. These kind of attacks play cheap politics with the rule of law. When you undermine the rule of law, you harm the individuals who need its help. Like the person Mr. Jablonski from Poland referred to earlier, who has told us about politically motivated prosecutions. It is those individuals who are harmed when you make cheap politics with the rule of law. So I thank the rapporteur for his opinion, and I'm proud to be a new member of this Assembly, which is putting forward this convention so every person who needs someone to help them access justice can do so.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I must now interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that the typewritten text can be submitted electronically, if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. I will now call Mr. Vardanyan, Rapporteur, to reply for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. President. I would like also to express the words of gratitude to Lord Hermer for the very interesting discussion which actually led us to the Shakespearean patience. And frankly speaking, when usually a person asks me who I am, what is my specialization, I'm saying I am guilty, I am a lawyer. Because actually being a lawyer in contemporary society is somehow the stigmatization, because yes, everybody understands perfectly well that it is complicated to live in a contemporary society without the lawyers, but nobody usually do not consider them as somebody who is valuable for the contemporary society. But we do not consider lawyers as just lawyers, because the lawyers are the guardians of the rule of law. It is impossible to have a democratic country which absolutely provides the rights and freedoms of the human beings without providing and supporting or ensuring the rule of law. I would like just to confess it's very complicated also to be a lawyer in politics, because when there is a political decision, nobody takes into account the lawyers, even the lawyers who are in the ruling or opposition parties, because they consider actually lawyers as supporters of this process, but not the full-fledged politicians. But then this is another story. And I would like to address the very interesting issues which was raised here. The first, the issue of identification of the lawyer with the client. This is quite important topic, and the convention is actually intended to prevent such manifestations. It is not necessary, it's dangerous, and it should be prohibited to identify a lawyer with the client. Plus, I would like just to say that it's quite important to create an atmosphere there. The people in society should understand that even if a client is an absolute evil, he or she should have the minimum rights to appear before the judiciary. Here we raise the issue about the lawyers in the authoritarian countries. I would like to emphasize that lawyers in authoritarian countries are the last hope for these societies to build a democratic rule of law state. And we all together should support them as guardians of rule of law. I would like to also address the issue of the misuse of convention, which was raised by Lord Lee. You know, lawyers who are representing the interest of the clients, we are not, you know, the judges. We may represent their interests. We should follow that the court wouldn't misuse a convention. And here we have a crucial responsibility because we are those who are actually established the court, and we elect the judges. I would like to address the issue of spyware. I absolutely agree with you, but this issue should be regulated in the Convention on Spyware, and we do all our best to find a solution on it. And I would like to emphasize the importance of establishment of GREVO, which would be a real monitoring mechanism to identify and find all the necessary elements which should be reflected in their reports. And I'm very looking forward to have opportunity to work with the GREVO, because GREVO would also submit relevant information to this Assembly, and the relevant committees would be able to be engaged in it. Thank you so much for the speeches, and thank you very much for the support.
Thank you, Vladimir. Lord King, would you like to take the floor as the chairperson of the committee?
Thank you, Mr. President. Could I begin by thanking Lord Hermer for his contribution to this debate? I agree with everything he had to say, with one qualification. He referred to the commitment of the new United Kingdom government to the Convention and the rule of law. There is nothing new about the United Kingdom's commitment to the Convention and the rule of law. It has been there since 1951. But despite Mr. Vaughan's observations, I think we can forgive Lord Hermer one party political point. Mr. President, as chair of the Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights, I am pleased to advise that our committee unanimously adopted the draft opinion prepared by Mr. Vardanyan. Preparing for the adoption of this opinion, the committee held a hearing with experts during its meeting in Yerevan in December last year. And indeed, on behalf of the committee, I would extend my thanks to the chair of the Committee of Experts on the Protection of Lawyers, Dr. Christoph Henriks, the representative of the CCBE, Mr. Laurent Petiti, and the representative of the Armenian Bar Association, Mr. Arnold Vardanyan, for their contributions to our work. I agree with the many speakers that the Convention is indeed a very timely instrument. Yesterday, the General Rapporteur on the situation of human rights defenders and whistleblowers, Mr. Zingeris, presented his information note. He noted that lawyers in several states have come under increasing pressure. In Belarus, disbarments and punitive revocation of legal licenses have become routine. In Russia, the situation is equally worrying. Alexei Ledin, a human rights lawyer known for defending Crimean political prisoners, was disbarred for, quote, discrediting, unquote, the Russian military. Dmitry Talentov, another prominent lawyer, was recently sentenced to 7 years in prison for speaking out on social media against the Russian war on Ukraine. As Mr. Vardanyan rightly noted, attacks against lawyers are not limited only to Russia and Belarus, of course, and indeed that was indicated by our speaker from Poland. Lawyers are being targeted in various parts of the world. Their safety and freedom to practice independently and without fear are, of course, paramount to the integrity of our legal systems and the maintenance of the rule of law. Colleagues, when lawyers unanimously agree on a text designed to protect lawyers, we should be confident that it is indeed a well-drafted instrument. I encourage you to support the draft opinion. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Lord King. So the debate is closed. The Committee on Legal Affairs and Human Rights has presented a draft opinion to which one amendment has been tabled, and I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. So I call Titus Korlatzian to support amendment number 1. Titus, you have 30 seconds.
Colleagues, with respect, I strongly invite you to approve this amendment that was approved by majority in the Legal Affairs Committee. It's an important amendment because when you see several cases that tend to be a systemic problem, you need specific regulation, not general regulations. This is when we are speaking about disproportionate measures of force which could affect the prestige of the legal profession. The amendment is providing a solution. Please vote the amendment. Thank you.
Thank you, Titus. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? Yes.
Oui, merci, Monsieur le Président. Deux mots pour...
Thank you very much, Chairperson. Just to express a little bit from the ALDE group's position against this amendment. I think that it's an example of, in my opinion, doesn't actually belong in a framework convention where we want to have a general scope to it. That's the first argument. And secondly, it's been said that this convention has universal scope, or universal reach. That is to say, to reach a maximum number of European countries that would have accession to this type of framework convention. Therefore, there could be some reticence towards it if this were included. And why lawyers only? Why not include, for example, other categories such as politicians or other types of citizens as well? That would be the third argument. Thank you.
Lord Keane, what is the opinion of the committee on the amendment?
Mr. President, the committee did agree to the amendment, but only by a narrow majority.
So, shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. Sorry, I forgot to ask the rapporteur. Yes, Mr. Vardanian, really sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Once again, if there is a political decision, lawyers are not heard, but this is a very important legal step. I am against this amendment because it is already covered in the Framework Convention, first. The second, it's addressed only a specific case and do not reflect the very logic of support of the rights of the lawyers. Imagine if the person for the domestic violence or for the killing of another lawyer was arrested. We said that he shouldn't be explored with the handcuffs.
Mr. Vardanian.
Yes, I'm finalizing.
No, the problem is that according to the rules, I shouldn't give you, so it was my mistake. Thank you so much for the Secretariat, Ms. Hadjivasiliou, to remind me. She's more experienced in rules. So since we are talking about rules, I think that we should have respected. It is my fault. So the last to be asked, that is, I will ask again Lord Keane, is the chair, the position of the committee. Can you please repeat the position of the committee, Lord Keane?
Thank you, Mr. President. The committee agreed this amendment, but only by a narrow majority.
Okay, thank you. And then we come to my previous, Titus, there's no point of order. Okay, I can hear you.
President, colleagues, 10 to 7, according to our rules, is not a narrow majority. Thank you.
Okay, it's an old story, but it's math. I'm not good in math, and I'm not going to comment on that. So the vote is open now. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The amendment is rejected. Now we will proceed to vote on the draft opinion contained in document 16-102 as amended. No, it was not amended because the amendment is rejected. As it was at the beginning, I remind you that a 2/3 majority is required. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. It is adopted. Thank you all. Colleagues, the second item of business this morning is a debate under urgent procedure on the urgent need for free and fair elections in Belarus. You can find document 16105, presented by Mr. Rizar Petru on behalf of the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy. We will try to finish by 11:45, maybe a bit later, because we start later. I will interrupt the list of speakers when we reach this time, and I call the rapporteur to take the floor. Mr. Petru, you know that you have 7 minutes now and 3 minutes later. So whenever you're ready, please take the floor. So, Mr. Petru, please, let's start. We're a bit late.
I want to turn on.
It's okay.
Okay, it's okay. Thank you, Mr. President. Dear colleagues, dear friends. It is less than 2 hours flight from Berlin and 2:30 from Athens or Rome. Less than 3 hours from Paris and 4 from Madrid. This is how long it takes to the capital of Belarus, Minsk. It's not far. It's not far, but at the same time, it seems and looks far away. Belarus is in Europe. It was in Europe, it is in Europe, and it will be in Europe. Belarusian people showed their willingness to be a part of democratic European society in 2020, when Lukashenko lost, then stole the presidential race against Svetlana Tikhanovskaya. In the 5 years since, repression in Belarus have only intensified, and the need for real and free fair elections has only become more urgent. In this assembly, we have regularly noted that the free and fair elections form the foundation of democracy. Citizens must have the right to freely choose their representatives in the environment when freedoms of speech, freedom of assembly, and associations are protected. In Belarus, these conditions are not existent. Opposition figures are imprisoned or forced to leave the country. Independent media are silenced and political parties are dissolved. Against this background of fear and repression, we watched last Sunday a so-called presidential election held in Belarus that thought to give legitimacy to the 30-year-old autocratic rule of Alexander Lukashenko. It is clear that these elections cannot, under any circumstances, be considered either credible or legitimate. It marked yet another chapter of Lukashenko's autocratic rule, illustrated by the systemic dismantling of democratic institutions, the suppression of civil and political rights, and the dreadful imprisonment of over 100,200 political prisoners, 8 of them incommunicado. Alexander Lukashenko, during a recent interview, was asked why his opponents were in prison or on exile. And he gave the disarming answer. It was their choice, he said, because they talk too much. It's hard to find a better self-summary of the despotic system of governance. Lukashenko's contempt for democratic norms is accompanied by contempt for international law. Lukashenko's support for Russia's illegal war of aggression against Ukraine, the hosting of Russia's nuclear weapon on the territory of Belarus, and the continued weaponization of migrants as a tool of hybrid war against my country, which is Poland, against Lithuania, against Latvia. This all shows the threat posed on European security by dishonest autocratic regime. On the personal note, when I was 17, I remember in June 1989, unexpectedly communism collapsed. A year before, one could only dream of such a scenario. Tyrannies fall suddenly, but one has to help them to fall. Going back to 1989, I remember German Chancellor Helmut Kohl visiting Poland on November the 9th, not expecting the Berlin Wall to fall during his visit. He suspended his visit and returned home on the next day. I wish our Belarusian colleagues the same miracle to happen. Of course, one cannot just wait. I do believe that if you work hard, if you do the right things, if you believe in universal values, your ideas will prevail, sooner rather than later. In the Parliamentary Assembly, we focus rightly on the democratic backsliding on our continent. On the other hand, let us be clear, the threats to our democracies are real, present, and dangerous. But at the same time, let us also pay attention to the global regression in 2024, the fall of dictatorship in Syria, in Bangladesh, new pressures faced by regime in Iran, in Venezuela. The thin line between continuation and collapse of these regimes grow even thinner. And what thins that line further is our strong commitment to opposing these regimes by standing firm behind our values, by protecting the human rights of European citizens and promoting democracy and the rule of law. Today, we have with us in our Assembly a representative of the Belarusian delegation to the Council of Europe. They are sitting with us today. This is a new chapter in our Assembly, giving new hope to the whole democratic society. It is a clear sign of the Assembly commitment to supporting a democratic future for Belarus. It is a continuation of our solidarity with the Belarusian people. It is a strong symbol of our solid support to democratic voices of Belarus, led by Mrs. Czechanovskaya. So thank you for your commitment to democracy. I want to assure you that we share the same vision of democratic future as independent, sovereign, and peaceful and prosperous Belarus. To sum up, dear colleagues, today, let us clearly reject these elections, the sham elections that took place last Sunday. Let us continue to call for unconditional release of the political prisoners. Let us push for accountability for Lukashenko's support to Russia's illegal full-scale war on aggression against Ukraine and for his crimes against Belarusian people. And let us work to support a democratic future for Belarus. Żyje Belarus. Thank you.
Thank you, Richard. Dear colleagues, I'm pleased now to welcome for the first time the Belarusian Democratic Delegation, and I will call Mrs. Ansalika Melinkava, who is the President of the Coordination Council and member of the representative delegation of Belarusian Democratic Forces, to speak for the first time in this assembly. Mrs. Melinkava, you have the floor.
Thank you. Mr. President, honorable members of the Parliamentary Assembly, it is truly humbling to stand before you today speaking on behalf of the Coordination Council of Belarus, the elected representative body of Belarusian Democratic Forces. Thank you for your decision to invite our delegation to the PACE session. This is a crucial motivation for us and a clear signal of your support to all of us in our struggle for freedom. I extend my greetings to all of you, as well as my Belarusian colleagues, including the head of our delegation, Alexandra Mamaeva, and the majority leader of the Coordination Council, Ambassador Pavel Latushka. The so-called election in Belarus was neither fair, free, nor fair. It violated every single standard of democratic elections. Today, there are over 1,200 political prisoners, at least 7 of whom have been tortured to death. Over the past years, all 11 opposition parties have been outlawed. More than 1,800 NGOs and all independent media have been liquidated. At least 300,000 Belarusians have been forced in exile. All our citizens abroad are now deprived of their voting rights. A climate of fear and terror has been deliberately created in my country. In such a situation, the announced results of so-called election cannot be recognized. We call on you to reject this fraudulent election, refuse to acknowledge Lukashenko's legitimacy, and denounce the process as a sham. Our delegation fully supports the Assembly's resolution calling for the urgent need for free and fair elections in Belarus. And I speak now of a joint position of the Coordination Council of Belarus, of the Office of Svetlana Tikhanovskaya, of the United Transitional Cabinet, and majority of civil society organizations and Belarusian people inside of the country who continue to resist the regime. Today, we are fighting to preserve the independence of our country, which is facing an existential threat from the Kremlin and the ideology of the Russian world. Russia is actively implementing a strategy of non-military occupation of Belarus. However, we understand that only a free nation can effectively resist threats for its sovereignty. It is impossible to imagine a free people ruled by a criminal. This is why one of our key priorities is holding Lukashenko accountable. He continues to commit crimes against humanity, against Belarusians, as well as war crimes and aggression against Ukraine. Democracy will prevail only when justice is served. The Belarusian people are a European nation. Our history and culture are an integral part of Europe's historical heritage, but it's equally important for us to be a part of Europe's future. We are grateful for your solidarity and will continue our struggle for freedom, human rights and democracy. Thank you. Живе Беларусь!
Thank you, Angelika. And in the debate, I will ask first Yevgenia Kravchuk, who is going to speak on behalf of the Liberal Democrats.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dear friends from Belarus, dear Richard, you did a great job, and on behalf of ALDE, I would have to acknowledge we will truly support this resolution. Let's be honest. It wasn't in an election. You can't even put election in brackets. It was a reappointment for the 7th time that Lukashenko did to himself. And let's be honest, no resolution will call to the new elections. It will not happen until the Kremlin regime resides, because Belarus is totally controlled diplomatically, economically from Russian Federation. Lukashenko gave in sovereignty of its own country, betrayed its own people to be in power for so long. That was his price. You truly know that Lukashenko gave also the territory to use for the aggression against Ukraine, and he has to be punished as well. And he also is responsible for the forced disappearances of Ukrainian children. For these last 3 years, more than 2,000 of Ukrainian children were transferred to Belarus territory for these re-educational camps. We do hope that we will see not just this delegation, but we will see democratic Belarus as the member of the Council of Europe. But for this, we need to help Ukraine to beat Russia, and then Belarus will be a democratic country and will be part of our community. Another thing I would like to underline, it's very important to understand what's happening with the identity of Belarus people. Belarus government, in brackets, Belarus state machine, is actually responsible for targeting the Belarus identity because they want to be in this part of Russian world, Ruski Mir. And all those who speak Belarus language are called oppositioners just because they know Belarus. It's very suspicious to speak Belarus language or to have and use the culture of Belarus. So I urge member states to help to protect Belarus identity, at least for those who reside in your countries in the member states, and also to help them to avoid the transnational repressions, because Lukashenko regime are trying to use an Interpol, other tools to actually punish people and have them deported to Belarus. I truly wish you luck. It was the work in this assembly. Ukraine is with us, ALDE is with you, and Живе Belarus!
Thank you, Ms. Kravchuk. And now I ask Mr. Paul Gavan to take the floor on behalf of European lefts. Please, Mr. Gavan.
Thank you, Madam Chairperson. I want to commend the rapporteur for this report and its very clear call for free elections in Belarus. It's a call that every political group here should endorse. There is no doubt that the last election held in 2020 was not free or fair, and that was before the constitutional changes in 2022 to allow Lukashenko to join the ranks of Aliyev and Putin and effectively become president for life. The Venice Commission has spoken clearly on this issue. The election this week is no different. Indeed, the refusal to allow election observation of any kind tells its own story, just as it did with Azerbaijan. The figure of 500,000 Belarusians who have had to leave the country due to political persecution is shocking. And of course, we must show solidarity and support to these people. It's also important to recognize and support Belarusian democratic forces. This was recognized in the Reykjavik Declaration made by this institution in May 2023. Increasing dialogue and solidarity with the opposition is very important. Paragraph 20 sets out a clear set of calls to what the Belarus regime need to do, and again, the Unified European Left are happy to endorse these calls. They represent a roadmap to a better democratic future. It's particularly pertinent to call out the continuing existence of the death penalty. This really is an affront to human rights, and there should, of course, be an immediate moratorium on the death penalty. Just one note of caution from our group, and it is that the future of Belarus should be determined solely by the people of Belarus. And the country should never be allowed to be up for grabs for international cowboy capitalists looking to make a quick buck through the wholesale capture of key assets and national wealth. The future of Belarus belongs to the people of Belarus. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Gavan. And the next on the list is Ms. Konstantinovska-Stoichevska, who will be speaking on behalf of Socialists. Please, Madam.
Thank you, Madam President. Free, fair, and democratic are no adjectives that can be added to the election process held this month in Belarus, where Lukashenko, faced by a make-believe 4 counter-candidates, won his 7th mandate to rule the country that is nor free nor democratic. Thanks to the constitutional changes adopted in 2022, he's been in power for 31 years. These changes that the Venice Commission strongly opposed, stating that they violate international principles. What happened in the 31-year-long regime? 1.5 million people have left Belarus, exiled journalists, people living in a gray zone, strong and unquestionable partnership with Russia, no independent media, strong censorship, out-of-the-mind penalties, people put to prison for a comment on social media, full participation and support of the atrocities in Ukraine, keeping company with blacklisted people, more than 1,200 political prisoners, not allowing oppositional figures to even submit a candidacy in an electoral process, exiled or imprisoned oppositional leaders, and in general, unseen repression and erosion of the human rights. OSCE was excluded 10 days prior to the election this month pace, not even invited. Lukashenko himself has stated, better a dictatorship in Belarus than democracy as in Ukraine. Hence, his unconditional love for the person who first congratulated him on his 7th mandate, Putin. What happened in the first 24 hours of this new 7th mandate? The Ministry of Information of Belarus sent a letter to Google with a request to pay attention of the alleged breaking of the law by the independent Belarus media outlets who work from exile. Who was the first to know this? Konstantin Pridibayo, a Russian propagandist. Mind you, these independent media outlets are depicted by the Belarus court, his court, as extremist formations. Censorship at its finest. To end, let me cite what was the reply of Lukashenko to Steve Rosenberg, a BBC reporter covering the elections, asking him on what account are these elections considered democratic given the fact that his political counterparts are in prison. Laughing, he said, "My counterparts are either in exile or in prison. Prison is for people who talk too much, but yet you are still here." Thank you.
Thank you so much. And now I ask Ms. Ingerd Skau to take the floor on behalf of the European People's Party. Please, Madam Skau.
Thank you, Madam President. I would like to start with recalling our resolution of last January, A Democratic Future for Belarus, in which we agreed to allow regular participation of a representative delegation of Belarusian democratic forces in the work of our assembly. Today, a year later, we have the first ever Belarusian delegation present in the hemicycle and included in our work. Words matter, Madam President, but they matter more when they are followed up by action. Your presence today, your participation in our work is a result of your hard work and our unwavering support of your dedication and work for a democratic future for Belarus. I wish you a warm welcome. President, on Monday, you labeled the presidential election in Belarus as shame and bogus. This was not an exaggeration. The level of repression was unprecedented. There were severe restrictions to political participation for opponents of the regime, arbitrary detention and torture, and mass human rights violation. Today, more than 1,200 political prisoners are still deprived of their freedom. Among them are Ales Bialyatsky, 2002 Nobel Peace Prize laureate, and the first winner of our Václav Havel Prize in 2013, and representatives of civil society organization Vyasna, also 2022 Nobel Peace Prize winners. Free and fair elections cannot be held in a context like this. In fact, it deprives the so-called elections of any kind of legitimacy. I therefore totally agree with the draft resolution in encouraging all member states to reject the legitimacy of the so-called presidential elections. Madam President, it is important that both the Assembly and the Council of Europe as a whole stay visible and strong in its support of the democratic opposition forces. It is important that we continue to support the tireless efforts of the Belarusian democratic forces led by Svetlana Tikhanovskaya and the independent Belarusian civil society, both inside and outside Belarus. These are truly impressive, strong, and courageous people that do not give up their fights for freedom and democracy. They deserve our support. Thank you, Madam President.
Thank you, Madam Skau. And now I ask Mr. Oleksiy Goncharenko to take the floor on behalf of European Conservatives. Please, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, do you know that Lukashenko likes animals? Yeah, he likes animals and he has a lot. He has cows. He even milks his cows. He doesn't milk just 10 million Belarusians. He also milks his cows. He has horses. The most he likes the dogs. His favorite one is a white Spitz, very beautiful white Spitz, Umka. Umka translates like clever. Why I'm telling you this? Yeah, it's a nice man, Lukashenko, he likes animals. Unfortunately, he doesn't like people, because he beats people, he kills people, he rapes people, he breaks lives of people. But why I'm telling about his animals and his pets? Because the best assessment and review on these elections gave Umka, his wonderful white Spitz. There is a video when Lukashenko is entering the so-called polling station, and he was with his Umka, with his dog, and his dog pissed on the ballot box. It's better a session than OSCE decision, than any other, and even better than in our resolution, because it says everything about these elections, so-called elections. So that's the best. It's really clever dog. And it's really funny, but it's not. Why? Because Belarus in reality is occupied state. And Lukashenko is no more as a puppet in hands of Putin. Putin even can change him for Umka, for example, for this white Spitz. He is maybe even cleverer than Lukashenko is. Lukashenko is there because Putin allows him to still be there. And what for Putin needs Belarus? And that's already important for everybody who are sitting here and for all millions of people who are living on our continent. Because Belarus today is a bridgehead, is a Platzdarm for Putin. When we are adopting with you resolutions, yeah, a lot of resolutions in Belarus, but what's happening there? Now there is nuclear weapons in Belarus. Now there is ballistic missiles, this so-called Oreshnik in Belarus. What's next? North Koreans in Belarus? This is a danger for everybody on this continent. And we can't just make resolutions on this. We finally need to do something with this. First of all, to help those Belarusians who are fighting, Paul Kalinovskого, other volunteers in Ukraine, other Belarusians who are ready to fight against this regime. We need to help with them. We need to train them. We need to give all support we can. Because in other case, one day Lukashenko or his white Spitz Umka will push a button and the missiles will fly on European cities. We need to stop it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Goncharenko. And in the debate, I call next Ms. Petra Bayer. Please, Ms.
Thank you, Madam President. There are lots of very good reasons why we should ensure that Belarus have free and fair elections. I think the best reason of all is the question of the rule of law. We have to reinstate the rule of law so as to ensure, for example, that it's possible for free trade unions to do their job. Last week, I spoke to the chairman of Alexander Yarostok, the chairman of the Belarus Free Trade Unions organization. There is no freedom of association in Belarus. People want to fight for their rights, and they're then thrown into a prison. It's also important to ensure that women finally have the possibility to enjoy a life free of violence, to lead a life which is in harmony with our values on human rights. And there are lots of things which women aren't able to do now in Belarus. There is compulsory labor for women or young girls who are locked up in prisons or closed institutions, and that applies as from the age of 11, and they get paid the princely sum of 10 euros a month. There are quite disproportionate prison sentences. So membership of an opposition organization, for example, is punished with a prison sentence similar to that handed down for rape. The use of violence by the state is widespread. Lots of people who go to complain to the police have their children taken away. Women who want to lodge a complaint with the police have to pay money before they can get their children back. State media publish so-called execution lists, lists containing the names of so-called terrorists. There are 29 women's names on the most recent list, and these women apparently have been categorized as terrorists by the regime and Lukashenko. So the situation for women is terrible. They're treated in a very degrading way, and they're subject to sexual violence. I could go on with this list. You'll find a more complete list in the annex to the report regarding the need to do away or elimination of violence against women. The only way in which women will finally be able to enjoy rights will be in a post-Lukashenko Belarus. We've also heard about the so-called election observers. We've heard about Rusko Mir, which was referred to beforehand. Let me quote, "These elections were described by that organization as a real opportunity for the people of Belarus to have a say in the future of their country." I think it's quite shameful. The parties, the political parties who members of this delegation came from the COPS, for example, from the FPÖ party in Europe, should be ashamed of themselves.
Next speaker is Ms. Sara Sofia Siren. Please, Madam.
Thank you, Madam President. We all know what is the foundation of democracy. It's free and fair election. And that is something the so-called elections seen in Belarus last week were absolutely not. I am deeply worried about the situation in Belarus. The democratic situation is only getting worse. Opposition is significantly repressed by the current regime. The number of political prisoners is growing. People are dying in prisons. There are ongoing reports of torture and other human rights violations. Hundreds of thousands of people have been forced to flee their country. This morning I met with the Belarusian opposition, and I heard that Mr. Lukashenko has even started attacking Belarusian people living in exile through punishing their families still living in Belarus. Authorities are trying to force many to return, including by halting passport renewals at Belarusian consulates abroad. Lithuania has taken right steps to take action together with the International Criminal Court. It is our job here in the Council of Europe to support democracy and human rights. We need to support and cooperate with the Belarusian democratic forces. This is the only way for the possibility for a democratic future in the country. It is right that the Belarusian opposition is included in our work here. I strongly support this cooperation. There is a large number of Belarusian people wanting to see Belarus as part of our European family. This institution represents the European values and freedom. I would also like to take a moment to express my joy also at the involvement of a youth representative in the Belarusian delegation here with us today. The youth hold the key to our future, and therefore their involvement is crucial. It is important that we together support them in their work for a democratic, safe, and free Belarus in the future. Finland has strongly supported the democratic forces of Belarus in order to give tools to build a real democracy once the day comes. People of Belarus deserve free elections. They deserve to vote without fear. They deserve to live in freedom and a possibility to build a country based on fundamental values.
Thank you, Madam. And our next speaker is Mr. Paweł Jabłoński. Please, sir.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, dear colleagues. But first of all, let me welcome our Belarusian colleagues. Great to be here with you. Thank you very much for what you have been doing We commend you for your bravery, for your courage, for your relentless fight in the name of your people. Many of you have been subject to persecution, to torture, imprisonment, forced exile, but nonetheless, you have been fighting. And you are here, you are representing Belarusian people. Mr. Lukashenko, let it be said very clearly in this assembly, Mr. Lukashenko is not the president of Belarus. He's a usurper, he's a dictator, and he was rejected by the people of Belarus in 2020. Since then, he's usurping power. He's not representing his people. And I want to express my gratitude also to every member of this assembly, to all the governments across Europe that support Belarusian civil society. In Poland, we have accepted hundreds of thousands of Belarusian refugees who found their second home in our country. And we continue to support them. We continue to support freedom of speech, freedom of expression in Belarus. We must continue to do so. I'm very happy today that we agree on a cross-party basis with colleagues from various political groups, and I urge you all colleagues to continue to support Belarusian people, to continue to support freedom of speech in Belarus, especially Belsat TV in Poland, of utmost importance that we provide Belarusian people with means to know what is the real situation there. And let us not forget that there is still over 1,000 political prisoners in Belarus, among them Polish nationals, including Andrzej Poczobut, brave journalist, very brave people, and we should do everything in our power to have them freed. I fully agree with Oleksiy Goncharenko. We must not only speak, we must also act. This resolution today is very important, but it cannot be our last step. We must do more. Our duty, first and foremost, is to safeguard human rights, to safeguard international law, and crimes of Belarusian regime, crimes of Alexander Lukashenko, of his subordinates, must be persecuted. I urge you, dear colleagues, to continue the work and to commence work in order to prepare a detailed investigation into the crimes of Mr. Lukashenko and his subordinates. We should be doing this as this assembly. This is our duty. If we want international law to be observed, we want human rights to be protected, we must do everything in our power for that these crimes are prosecuted and that the perpetrators, Lukashenko in the first place, are brought to justice. Thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. And the next on the list is Monsieur Claude Kern. Vous avez la parole, monsieur.
Mr. Kern, thank you very much. Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, last Sunday, no surprises, Mr. Lukashenko, who's been in office since 1994, announced that he had been re-elected President of Belarus on the basis of 87% of the vote. He calls his country a brutal democracy. He has also inflicted a brutal crackdown on his own population. In actual fact, the regime in office is by no means democratic. The elections that were held do not correspond to democratic standards. They lack any legitimacy whatsoever. And we need to say that. We need to say so forcefully. And I'd like to thank our colleague, Mr. Petru, for tabling a resolution before this House, which clearly condemns the sham elections that took place on the 26th of January 2025, but also calls out the Lukashenko regime and its practices. Belarus is today an instrument in the hands of the Russian president, who used its territory to invade Ukraine in March 2022. Belarus made a contribution to the hybrid war perpetrated against Europe by instrumentalizing migrants, in particular in order to destabilize Poland. We've already said that in this assembly. Belarus has refused to abolish the death penalty, and it is in fact one of the most brutal regimes. It's brutal within its frontiers, but also in transnational terms. And despite the fact that there have been releases orchestrated these last few months, notwithstanding, there are many opponents who are still silenced or in exile or in prison. There are some 500,000 Belarusians who have been forced to flee their country, and my thoughts go out to them and to the 1,200 political prisoners still behind bars today. Following an interparliamentary group initiative in the Franco-Belarusian Friendship Society, many French senators, in fact, sponsored in 2023 a number of political prisoners. We wanted to show our support on behalf of the French Senate. And today's resolution, which we're looking at, talks about the harsh conditions under which these people are detained. These prisoners can't actually communicate with the outside world for an indeterminate period of time. I would refer you in particular to the case of Maria Kolesnikova, who for months was unable to communicate. They're subject to torture, to inhuman and degrading treatment, different types of violence, punitive measures, all of which breach the values that we defend in this House. The resolution, which we shall adopt this morning, is a light of hope that we would like to share with them. Let us not forget them. Let us stand shoulder to shoulder with them. I very much hope that our position today in this House will keep the flame of hope alive in their hearts. Finally, I would like to welcome the fact that this morning our Assembly has met with a delegation of democratic forces from Belarus. I very much hope that tomorrow Belarus will be faced with a democratic future that will allow its population to express itself freely without fear of reprisal. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Guerin. And now I ask Mr. Emanuelis Zingeris to take the floor. Please, sir.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. First time we have real fighting Democrats, not on balcony. I remember from '93 when I was started to be, but we have them here. That is a huge step forward that we agree, friends, with the structural changes, and they have their office here. They will be observing our work, and I invite to structuralize until the end and to have them in the committees. So welcome, welcome. Secondly, we have just a hybrid attack from Lukashenko side, who represent actually Joseph Stalin type regime in the middle of Europe. Well, hybrid attack was based on the illegal immigrants seduced and brought to Polish-Lithuanian-Latvian border and sent to our side, and behind was Belarusian army. That is the hybrid attack against European Union, against the countries who are inside of Europe. So secondly, Belarusian culture were annihilated during the Lukashenko regime during the last more like 20 years. More like 300-400 schools in Belarusian language was cancelled, and instead it was established Russian schools with the ideology from Joseph Stalin time. The fake ideology, against Europe ideology, against human rights ideology. Thirdly, Lithuania started the process. I'm asking you, thank you, I'm asking you to follow Lithuanian example and bring appeal to international court system and start the legal procedures against Lukashenko regime. Lukashenko regime is a criminal regime who should be under procedures, and the juridical cooperation with him should be stopped in all possible levels. Fourthly, I would like to say that remembering the airplane issue, the Athens-Vilnius airplane was stolen, and international organizations declare after a huge investigation that it was terror attack in the name of official Lukashenko regime. That was calculated in under international law like a terror attack against international order. Last, we would like to have the party system here linked to the Belarusian party system. Belarusians have parties, and Mr. Statkevich should be linked to the Social Democrats, and we should take care about him, and Christian Democrats of Europe should take care about Belarusian Christian Democrats. We have responsibilities, party responsibilities, to make our auspices in everyday activities. And last one, I would like to say I'm proud having Madame Sikhanovskaya in Vilnius. I'm proud having Mr. Latushka in Warsaw. And I would like that we will be going forward integrating our friends in our structures and giving them even our small souvenirs like our passports who printed here in Council of Europe. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Zingeris. Dear colleagues, I must now have to interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that the typewritten text can be submitted electronically if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. Now I call Mr. Petru, rapporteur, to reply. You have 3 minutes, sir.
Thank you very much. First of all, I want to say that I was really moved when our colleague, Angelika Melnikova, was speaking here on behalf of Belarus. This is really historical, and this is very important. It opens the new chapter, not only in our assembly, but also, I hope, that in the democratic forces for Belarus. Secondly, I thank you very much for this debate. It's important. It's important that we reacted so quickly to the sham elections that took place last Sunday. And last, it's important to separate Belarus topic from the Russians one. Of course, they are connected, but on the other hand, they are very different. And today we fight for free and prosperous Belarus, which is very important. Let me conclude this debate. And we have to be aware of what is at stake. At the heart of democracy lies the principles that governments derive their legitimacy from the people. It is a fundamental necessity for human rights, for progress and justice. Yet in Belarus, these principles have been consistently violated. The elections are neither free nor fair, and the voices of the people are silenced through intimidation, censorship, and state violence. The consequences of the sham elections are not just political. They are deeply human. Opposition leaders are exiled or imprisoned, and citizens live under constant fear. The international community has condemned these abuses, but words alone are not enough, and there were many people who said that today during the debate. Concrete actions, diplomatic pressure, sanctions, and support for civil society are crucial to ensure that democracy is not just distant hope, but the present reality. The struggle for more democracy in Belarus is not just the struggle for Belarusian democratic forces with us today. It's our as well. It is the test of our commitment to justice and the rule of law. If we believe in the power of the people, we must stand with them. Ladies and gentlemen, democracy is not a privilege, it's a right. Today, we reaffirm our unwavering demand for a free and fair elections in Belarus, and the people of Belarus deserve nothing less. Thank you very much for the debate, and hopefully we will accept the declaration soon. Thank you. Resolution, sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Rapporteur. And now I have to ask Mr. Chairperson of the committee, Mr. Bouix, whether he wishes to speak. Vous avez 3 minutes.
You have 3 minutes, sir. Thank you very much, Madam President. Rapporteur, dear Richard, dear colleagues. I speak today on behalf of the committee as the debate reaches its conclusion, and I wanted to take this opportunity to thank you most warmly for the exchanges we've had today. We are committed to a democratic future for the people of Belarus, and we've shown that. It is clear and unwavering. I would also like to thank the delegation representing democratic forces of Belarus for their presence here today with us. I commend them on their work, their bravery faced with brutal, inhuman repression. I would also like to welcome all those proposals that helped strengthen the resolution, a resolution that was unanimously, and I do reiterate that, unanimously supported by the members of our Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy. We want to call out the so-called sham elections that were organised by the Lukashenko regime Sunday last. My thanks also go to the General Rapporteur for a Democratic Belarus, Mr. Richard Petru. Thank you very much for your continuous work. Thank you for your support. And thank you also for being here to help us out, Mr. Zingeris, in terms of supporting Belarus under all these difficult circumstances. I know that you have been very involved in this too, Mr. Zingeris, for a long time. Over and beyond these words of thanks, I have to recall that the situation is very serious indeed. I would like to recall that there is a generalized crackdown being operated by the Lukashenko regime. This has led to arbitrary detention for tens of thousands of peaceful demonstrators following the sham elections of 2020. It still continues today, as the rapporteur quite rightly pointed out, and this is in blatant breach of international law and democratic standards. The Assembly stands firm against this crackdown, this repression, and we demand, and I do emphasise demand, the immediate and unconditional release of the 1,200 political prisoners, men and women, currently held. In addition to which, the Lukashenko regime was involved in the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. It weaponized migratory flows, and I think that these phenomena show that the Lukashenko regime is in fact a threat to peace and to international security. I think it's been well pointed out in this debate. If it is to meet its obligations in terms of international law, then the actions of the Lukashenko regime have to come to an end. To conclude, once again, allow me to extend my words of thanks to all of you, and I would call upon every member present in this chamber to please support the resolution. The resolution, in fact, gives voice to our demand for free and fair elections in Belarus. Thank you.
Merci, Monsieur Weeks. The debate is closed, and now we move to voting. Dear colleagues, the Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has presented draft resolution to which 2 amendments have been tabled. I understand that the chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendments 1 and 2 to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved, be declared as approved. Is that so, Mr. Buix?
C'est bien ça.
Yes, that is correct.
If no one objects, I will consider the amendments to be approved. Is there an objection? If there is, we will need to verify that the objection has the required support of 10 people. Please, could those who object raise their hand? I see no objection, so amendments 1 and 2 to the draft resolution are therefore approved and will not be called. So we will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 16105. A simple majority is required. The vote is open, dear colleagues. The vote is closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 16105 is adopted. Congratulations, Mr. Rapporteur. It's yours.
Dear colleagues, the final item of business this morning is a debate under urgent procedure on European commitment to a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. Document is number 16106, presented by Mrs. Miapetra Kumpula-Natri on behalf of the Committee of Political Affairs and Democracy. In order to finish by 1 p.m., I will interrupt the list of speakers at about 12:35 to allow time for the reply and the vote. Order, please. Dear colleagues. Emanuelis. Mr. Zingeris. Dear Emanuelis. Colleagues, we have already started the next item. Mrs. Kumpula-Natri, we have 5 minutes now and 3 at the end.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. President, dear colleagues, it is an honor to present you this urgent report on the European commitment to just and lasting peace in Ukraine. In a rapidly evolving geopolitical situation, Ukraine needs us more than ever. The full-scale war has been going on for nearly 3 years, but Ukraine has been under attack for 11 years. And we hope peace is on the horizon, but not at any cost. We are standing in the critical juncture for Ukraine and Europe, and I want to underline that our unity will determine the fate of Ukraine. It is critical that we and the European leaders stand united with Ukraine and maximize our support. Our unity holds keys to just and lasting peace for Ukraine, which is indispensable for the security and stability of Europe and beyond. Assembly has passed numerous resolutions where we clearly and unequivocally condemned Russia's full-scale war of aggression on Ukraine, which constitutes a blatant violation of Ukraine's independence, sovereignty and territorial integrity. We need to underline that any peace negotiation must involve Ukraine and respect its right to determine its own future. It is Ukraine's sovereign right to apply for membership in any international organization, and I strongly support the proposed amendment in this regard, including EU membership. Let me also insist that any peace deal must be based on the principles of international law, human rights, rule of law and democracy. Lasting peace is only possible with accountability of the aggressor. Russia should abandon its imperial ambitions and stop interfering in sovereign nations' affairs. The register of damages is an important first step to ensure accountability. Now we need to move forward with a compensation fund and claims commission and a special tribunal. I was happy to hear from our Secretary General of the European Council this plenary hall on Tuesday that things are progressing. We welcome his commitment to use knowledge, experience and political will of the Council of Europe for establishment of a special tribunal to prosecute Russian and Belarusian leaders for crimes of aggression. In this draft resolution, I also make reference to Zelensky's peace through strength and importance robust defense capacity, and repeat our European will to remain resolute and united to secure Ukraine's future. We are a human rights organization. We must stand with Ukrainians. We do not forget any Ukrainian. I call immediate return of prisoners of war, unlawfully detained civilians, and deported children. And more of those helping in these inhumane deportations must be individually sanctioned. Ukraine needs more humanitarian assistance, and I want to extend my special gratitude towards the tireless fight of Ukrainian brave nation, their strength and solidarity. But I also want to take here opportunity and raise the role of the NGOs, civilians and volunteers in Ukraine, but also across the world, who are working tirelessly to support Ukrainian society survive, the individuals survive the winter, birth, their everyday life. NGOs' role for humanitarian aid in Ukraine is worthy of thanks and support. This urgent resolution underlined that we must enhance our political, economical and military support to Ukraine. We also need to strengthen the current sanctions regime against Russia. Sanctions are functioning. We do not want to finance killing machinery of Putin, nor let the core technology to helping bombing in homes and critical infrastructure in Ukraine. Here I would also like to mention targeted individual sanctions on all the military leadership and elite and those who have been involved in these activities contributing the horrors of war. In the light of the recent events, my home sea, Baltic Sea, I want to, in this resolution, also mention the need to better counter the Russian shadow fleet. Not only does it allow Russia to get its oil to the world markets, but sanctioned vessels are in so bad shape that we live in the risk for eco-catastrophe in the vulnerable Baltic Sea. Let me also say a few words of the reconstruction. When the day comes, we are ready to help with infrastructure, restoration of environment and removal of war debris, support the displaced person, as well as promote democratic institutions, human rights and rule of law. This Assembly commends Ukraine for its achievements in implementing Council of Europe Action Plan, resilience, recovery and reconstruction, and its progress in the European Union accession progress, despite of brutal war. Let me reaffirm my unwavering resolve to support peace, justice and rule of law in an independent Ukraine and across the continent.
Thank you, Ms. Petra. Dear colleagues, before I open the debate, I just want you to know that at the gallery there are people coming from Ukraine. And among them, there are many who were captured and kept by the Russian troops. And the Russian troops says I had the opportunity to talk to them, I'm talking about the people from Ukraine earlier in my office, did not respect the Geneva Convention. There's a journalist who was captured, a soldier, and others. Among them, there is a young woman, she's 26, Lenya. When she was captured, she was 24. My daughter is 24. And it's not only this, the reason that I was moved, but because of the stories that she has told me. I call you all in this debate, which has the accurate title of European Commitment to a Just and Lasting Peace in Ukraine, and in these days where many people around the world are talking about peace in Ukraine, to have in my mind, in our minds, what these people have suffered all these 3 years. I open now the debate, calling Paul Gavan on behalf of the United European Left. Paul.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to start on behalf of the Unified European Left with a clear statement that Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine was wrong and should not have happened. Indeed, we've made this point on several occasions in this Assembly. Let me also state that the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Ukraine must be respected. It is also true to say that there were real provocations on the part of the West in the years preceding this illegal invasion. There are many points in this report that I support, including the condemnation of Russia's invasion, and especially the overriding call for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. But many parts of the report in effect call for a further doubling down on military support and sanctions, calls for more of the same. And the problem with this approach is that it ignores the horrendous and ever-increasing death toll in this conflict. How many lives have been lost in this war? A report from the Wall Street Journal last September, citing intelligence sources, suggested that the number of Ukrainians and Russians killed or wounded had reached 1 million at that time. The truth is, we will only find out the real rate of casualties when the conflict is over. And each week, we know the casualties are increasing. The UN Refugee Agency, in addition, estimates that 6.7 million Ukrainians have had to flee their country, while another 4 million have been internally displaced. Whilst there are important references to peace summits in the draft resolution and key topics to be negotiated, what is missing from this report is a clear call for an immediate ceasefire. This is what is needed, and it is needed now. The alternative is to keep throwing thousands and thousands of more young Ukrainian lives into this furnace of war, which has been stuck in a horrendous stalemate for 2 years now. The escalation of the conflict through the use of direct missile attacks on Russian cities and the introduction by Russia of intercontinental ballistic missiles should be seen as a warning sign to the whole world. The priority has to be an intervention to bring about a ceasefire. Diplomacy and dialogue, not further military escalation, are the only viable paths to a peaceful settlement in this region. And I believe it is a tragedy that the potential of a peace settlement from the Istanbul talks of 2022 was effectively not taken up. For this reason, the absence of a clear call for an immediate ceasefire, the Unified European Left are not in a position to support this resolution.
Thank you, Paul. Piero Fassino on behalf of the Socialists, Greens and Democrats.
Thank you, President. I will speak in Italian.
Grazie alla collega Kumpalama.
I would like to thank our colleague for the report, which I fully support. We've now reached the 3rd anniversary of a devastating war. And as the President just reminded us, we should never forget the terrible suffering which the people of Ukraine have gone through. Everybody agrees that after 3 years of war, the time has come to reach peace. I think we all share that wish. However, what do we mean by peace? That's the real issue. Moscow's position comes with very stringent conditions. Moscow doesn't have the slightest intention of returning the Donbass or Crimea, other occupied territories. Moscow insists that Ukraine not be allowed to join any international organization. Moscow refers to the need for a change of political direction in Ukraine. In other words, conditions which would apply not so much to peace as to a surrender. That would pave the way to an unjust peace. And the fact is, we can't accept an unjust peace, and there's something we can't ignore. If these conditions are imposed by Putin, not only would it be wrong to talk about a just peace, it would be wrong to talk about peace at all. I think we should also be very concerned about the ambiguity demonstrated by the American administration, which seems to be moving towards a Korean-style decision with a long frozen border. That's not peace. That's a short-term solution which would pave the way to further conflicts. This is why it's so important, as is said in this resolution, that we call for a just peace. We have to insist on and defend full sovereignty for Ukraine. Ukraine must be free to choose for itself which international organizations it wishes to join and how it should define its own foreign policy. We shouldn't accept any obstacles to Ukraine joining the European Union. The agreement must contain provisions on compensation for the devastation which has been handed down on Ukraine. There must also be provisions on the return of kidnapped children and all prisoners of war. Supporting Ukraine means supporting peace along those lines. We have to support this across the board, including with military support. I don't think that anybody seriously believes that the ultimate solution can be found through arms. Peace can't come through weapons, but it's essential that Ukraine be able to go to the negotiating table in the best conditions possible. We have to support Ukraine in every way, including militarily, and this means that Ukraine would indeed be in a position to go to the negotiation table with a sustainable position in which it could set out its own needs. To do this, it needs the support of the whole of Europe and, of course, the Council of Europe. I support all measures, including the sanctions adopted so far. The President interrupts. The register of damages. There's no peace without justice. We have to work to ensure that we support any solution which ensures that Ukraine can find the way to peace on the basis of... The President interrupts again. The President interrupts.
Belen Hoyo, on behalf of the European People's Party. Is Belen here? Let us go on with Lord Richard Keane on behalf of the European Conservatives.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, colleagues. The Treaties of Westphalia in 1648, which are sometimes referred to as the Peace of Westphalia, established the international law principle of state sovereignty. The Peace of Westphalia was based upon the concept of coexisting sovereign states and the recognition of a sovereign state's right to decide its own fate and future. What is perhaps less well known is that it established the precedent for peace reached by diplomatic congress and guaranteed by a third party. That came after 30 years of war that devastated Europe. The prospect of a further 30 years of war in Europe is appalling, but let us remember there is a precedent. Ukraine is the victim of a war of aggression that has devastated much of the state, and at present leaves Crimea and much of the Donbass unlawfully occupied by Russia. That war cannot continue indefinitely, but equally, it cannot be the subject of a simple ceasefire. If we ensure that Ukraine is at its strongest militarily, economically, and politically, then proposals for a cessation of hostilities will make sense even to the aggressor. But any such proposal can only make sense to Ukraine if it is subject to a clear and unambiguous guarantee, whether that involves NATO, Europe, United States, or others. In such circumstances, occupied land might have to remain in the hands of the aggressor, although recognized by all civilized nations as part of the Ukrainian state. A similar situation occurred within the Baltic states after 1945, when the Soviet occupation of the three republics was not recognized internationally. The Baltic states were able to resume their territorial integrity as independent nation states after 1991. It is a reminder that all despotisms eventually fail. Colleagues, if we do not do all in our power, both politically and economically, to enable Ukraine to secure a just peace, then the prospects for the whole of Europe will be grim.
Thank you, Lord King. On behalf of Liberal Democrats, Baroness Sal Brinton has the floor.
Mr. President, next month is the third anniversary of Putin's illegal invasion of Ukraine. The bravery and determination of the Ukrainian people and the leadership of President Zelensky continues to be outstanding. And there is no doubt that the Russian Federation has violated international law and the Charter of the United Nations. Putin's troops have attacked civilians, hospitals, schools, and infrastructure. Putin has also had to go to Iran for weapons and North Korea for troops, and these alone show that Russia is struggling. But, dear colleagues, on the other side of the balance sheet is Ukraine, a nation that knows what it wants and should have the right to protect its ancient sovereignty, to take up its place at the heart of Europe, and to join the European and NATO. Now, we European nations have come to their aid, recognizing these undoubted rights and helping where we can. And we hope that President Trump restores the non-defense aid support from the United States of America. Dear colleagues, peace can only be built through strength. And ALDE believes that we must continue to stand shoulder to shoulder with Ukraine, providing defense assistance as well as humanitarian, infrastructure and civil support too. But it is more than that. PACE stands for the rule of law, for human rights and protecting true democracy. And so this is our battle too. In downtown Vilnius, it is impossible to miss the sign that the liberal mayor of Vilnius put on his highest city building, Vladimir Putin, The Hague awaits. It does. Accountability will come to the Russian Federation and to Putin in particular. He even boasts that he has removed 700,000 children from Ukraine, but abduction and abduction of children in war is a heinous war crime. PACE members' solidarity with Ukraine is strengthened because now we are all learning from Ukraine ourselves. The United Kingdom forces have been helping Ukraine in training their military, but members of our military tell me that now Ukraine is the country that has the practical experience of managing a 21st century war. Yes, the trenches echo World War I, but also the use of drones, AI, and disinformation. So, dear colleagues, Ukraine will not be free until Putin is held to account, all Ukrainian land is returned, displaced people and prisoners of war are returned, and above all, Ukrainian children now in Russia are returned, because only then will Ukraine have a lasting peace. And we in PACE all have our role to play to make that happen. Please support the resolution.
Thank you. Next speaker is Sarah Sofia Sirin.
Mr. President, Ukraine needs our full support against the Russian aggression, which has been ongoing already over 10 years, since 2014, and only escalated soon, already 3 years ago. Continued support is vital for Ukraine to uphold human rights, the rule of law, and democracy, which are crucial for recovery and stability, not only in Ukraine, but in Europe as a whole. European countries need to remain united and strong in our support for Ukraine, as the outcome of the war will affect our own security and freedom and the future of our continent. Ukraine is fighting for the values that we here share. There is hope for just peace, peace through strength. The coming months are crucial. Just today, the President of Finland, Mr. Alexander Stubb, said that we are talking about a time frame of 3 to 6 months, aiming first for a ceasefire and possible peace negotiations after that. It is clear that peace needs to be just, and for this, Ukraine needs more support. There is also a need for accountability for the Russian Federation's actions, including establishing a special tribunal for war crimes. Those who commit wrongdoings must be held accountable for their actions. There needs to be more and more effective sanctions against Russia and Russian individuals, as well as their allies. The security situation in Europe is currently very uncertain and concerning. We need to enhance our efforts to strengthen our security. This means continuing and strengthening support for Ukraine, and it also means investments in our own defense and European defense industries. It is important that the rapporteur in her speech especially mentioned the Russian shadow fleet. It causes a growing security and environmental threat at the Baltic Sea. I want to underline the importance of recognizing human rights violations in Ukraine, especially concerning children. There is a call for increased assistance for Ukrainian children. I would also like to thank the rapporteur for her commitment and work in supporting safe return of Ukrainian missing children forcibly taken from their parents. This work is very important.
Thank you. Rostislav Tistik is next.
Dear colleagues, today I address you during a time when the largest war in 8 decades is unfolding on the European continent. For 3 years now, Ukraine has been heroically resisting for the full-scale aggression of the Russian Federation. And this struggle is not only about our survival, but also about the shared future of Europe. During this time, Russia has suffered losses of approximately more than 800,000 personnel, nearly 10,000 tanks, 20,000 armored combat vehicles, and 22,000 artillery systems. At the same time, Ukrainian defense industry has demonstrated significant progress. As of 2025, Ukraine produces over a third of the weapons used by its armed forces, with a projected production capacity of $35 billion. However, this war is not just a problem for Ukraine. Its consequences are already being felt worldwide, especially in Europe. This energy crisis, disruption to food supply chain, and migrations challenges are only part of the trial we face, but the greatest threat lies elsewhere. If Ukraine is defeated, it will set a precedent for the destruction of the rules-based international order. At the same time, Ukrainian success will strengthen Europe. Together we have already achieved a great deal. The EU has provided Ukraine with over 35 billion euros in assistance, including humanitarian, military and financial support. Hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians have found refuge in your countries. And this has not only saved lives, but also made stronger solidarity between our peoples. Yet we must understand that achieving a just and lasting peace requires continuing determination. Firstly, holding perpetrators accountable. International tribunals must serve as tools of justice to punish those who have committed crimes against humanity. Secondly, supporting Ukraine. We call for increased sanction pressure on Russia, greater military assistance, and the establishment of long-term financial mechanisms for Ukrainians' recovery. And thirdly, integration of Ukraine into the European community. Ukraine has proven that its place is in Europe. We expect progress in Ukraine's EU accession process, as this will send a powerful signal of support not only to Ukrainian people, but to the entire world. Peace in Ukraine is cornerstone of stability and security in Ukraine and, of course, in Europe. Our collective task is to ensure that the aggressor cannot achieve its goals. Ukrainians' victory will mean the protection of European values, the rules of law, and democratic principles that underpin our shared future. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you. Leni Vaslenko, you have the floor.
President, dear colleagues, dear rapporteur, on behalf of the people of Ukraine, let me thank you for the time and efforts this Assembly dedicates to the issue of peace in Ukraine. Until peace through victory that is achieved, this Assembly needs to continue debating. Its committees and all the other bodies need to continue holding brainstorming sessions as to how we can accelerate this peace and this victory. The report is very clear and concise, calling on countries to double up on economic sanctions, to do more to investigate, identify, and put a stop to sanction circumvention, to make sure that Ukraine gets all the humanitarian aid and the military aid necessary for it to continue standing and fighting, and to harmonize rules, laws, and efforts on Russian frozen assets and the compensation that is due to be paid out to all the victims in Ukraine. Rest assured, dear colleagues, that millions of Ukrainians will applaud the adoption of this report today. Millions more will be watching and waiting for your governments to take action on every single point in this report. A special thanks to our colleague George Papandreou, who today in the Political Committee made sure that a special mention was made in the report for the prisoners of war, for the deported children, and for the civilians who suffer in Russian prisons. As our President has mentioned, today with us we have survivors of Russian captivity. Ukrainians who have not only lived through the hell of Russian prisons and tortures, but who have found strength to come here and speak to you, colleagues, about what they have been through. Please find the time to come to our side event and to talk to these Ukrainians in the gallery. The report comes at a very critical time, calling for Europe to stand united behind Ukraine while a change of power is taking place across the Atlantic. This means that international aid has been stalled to Ukraine. This is why Ukraine needs Europe's solidarity and action now more than ever. Alone, none of us stand a chance against Russia and the axis of evil that it has formed around it with China, Iran, North Korea, but together we can topple once and for all the terrorists, aggressors, and oppressors out there. Europe, we have a choice to make today. We can be strong and united, or we can be divided and irrelevant. I say, let history remember that when the moment came, Europe stood stood strong and united, stood for peace through strength. Europe stood and Europe won. Thank you.
Thank you. Dear colleagues, I must now interrupt the list of speakers. The speeches of members on the speakers list who have been present during the debate but have not been able to speak may be given to the table office for publication in the official report. I remind colleagues that the typewritten text can be submitted electronically if possible, no later than 4 hours after the list of speakers is interrupted. Now I call Ms. Kumpula Natri, rapporteur, to reply. You have 3 minutes, madam.
Thank you, Chair. I want to thank colleagues for the support previously on this work and today in this plenary, and I really plea for everyone to take right side of the history and remain committed to help Ukraine. This House calls for the democracy, rule of law, respect to international law, and it is not to make one side to surrender, to give up on these core principles that this House stands for. We are unfortunately seeing the case that if we reduce the amount of military equipment in Ukraine, it means that more missiles come through the skies to the infrastructure, to kill the people, to really kill the innocent. So that's why I understand that this House of Peace, unfortunately, needs to speak about the military equipment. Even there are more organizations, more countries, governments to do that, so not everything fits into this resolution if something is not mentioned. But I really am happy to see this strong support. The times are evolving. We all hope to see the peace negotiations and strong Ukraine to find solution. Make Ukraine to be proud for its own future and build it based on the democratic will of the nation. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Rapporteur. Now I have to ask Mr. Chairperson of the committee, Mr. Buix, do you wish to speak? You have 3 minutes.
Merci, Madame la...
Thank you, Madam President. Dear colleagues, on behalf of the Committee for Political Affairs and Democracy, I'd like to thank my colleague, the rapporteur, for the excellent work she's done. She really has worked very hard completing this record in record time, and I'd like to thank all the colleagues who've spoken for their contribution to the debate. All of us preferred not to have another urgent debate on the need for a just and peaceful solution in Ukraine. However, the fact is, our presence today in this chamber underlines yet again our unwavering support for the people of Ukraine in their fight for independence and freedom. The statutes of the Council of Europe remind us that peace based on international cooperation is essential if we are to promote the values of human society and civilization. We should never forget this when we debate issues such as this, so as to ensure that our work as members of this Assembly and as members of our national parliaments really can make a difference. Mr. Roussopoulos, the President of the Assembly, has already voiced his hope that our desire for peace will win the day over violence, together that justice and responsibility will once again hold sway. The President of the European Court of Human Rights, Marco Bosnaik, reminded us just a few days ago of that. The report which we're about to adopt reiterates the need for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine, and this will only be possible if international law is respected rather than of brute force. Our position must be firm in the face of this violation of international law by Russia. The instigation of a lasting peace in Ukraine will have a deep effect on security, both on the European continent but also around the rest of the world. This report calls for economic, military and political support for Ukraine, so as to enable it to respond to current and future needs in the process of rebuilding the country as it prepares for membership of the European Union. This report also reiterates an appeal sent by the Assembly to Member States of the Council of Europe, to the relevant European bodies and international partners, so that all of these stakeholders adopt measures which will force Russia to be held to account. As we have already heard, it's been reiterated that we should set up a special tribunal for crimes of aggression against Ukraine, to set up a mechanism providing for global compensation, to transfer Russian assets which have been frozen, and to pave the way to further sanctions. I would like to underline just how urgent these measures are. This is stressed in the report, in particular given the rapidly evolving international geopolitical landscape. Once again, today, we reiterate our determination to remain united on the basis of our principles in the search for a just and lasting peace in Ukraine. I'd like to thank once again Mrs. Kumpula-Natri on behalf of the Political Affairs and Democracy Committee. Thank you, Madam, for your excellent work. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for your attention.
The debate is closed, and now we move to voting. The Committee on Political Affairs and Democracy has presented a draft resolution to which 10 amendments have been tabled. I remind you that speeches on amendments are limited to 30 seconds. I understand that the chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that amendments 8, 6, 9, 1 and 4 to the draft resolution, which were unanimously approved by the committee, be declared as definitively approved. Is that so, Mr. Buix?
Oui.
If no one...
Yes.
The amendments to be approved. Is there an objection? If there is, we will need to verify that the objection has the required support of 10 people. Please, could those who object raise their hand? I see no objection, so amendments 8, 6, 9, 1 and 4 to the draft resolution are therefore approved and will not be called. I understand that the chairperson of the committee wishes to propose to the Assembly that Amendment 5 to the draft resolution, which was rejected by the committee with a 2/3 majority, be declared as definitively rejected. Is that so, Mr. Buix?
Oui.
Correct. Thank you so much. If no one objects, I will consider the amendment to be rejected. Is there an objection? If there is, we will need to verify that the objection has the required support of 10 people. Please, could those who object raise their hands? I see no objection, so Amendment 5 to the draft resolution is therefore rejected and will not be called. I have received an oral amendment from Ms. Kumpula-Natri, which reads as follows. In paragraph 4, after the words 15 and 16 June 2024, add the words based on the Ukrainian peace formula. The President may accept an oral amendment on the grounds of promoting clarity, accuracy, or conciliation, and if there is not opposition from 10 or more members to it being debated. In my opinion, the oral amendment meets the criteria of Rule 34.7a. Is there any opposition to the amendment being debated? I see no opposition. I therefore call Ms. Kumpula-Natri to support the oral amendment. You have 30 seconds, Madam Rapporteur.
Yes, thank you. I think it's very fair to name it and spell it out, as this was urgency. It was also due to time constraints that it was missing, so very important. And we have had it before in our resolutions.
Thank you so much, Madam. Does anyone wish to speak against the oral amendment? I see no one, so the committee unanimously accepted this oral amendment. I shall now put the oral amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. So the oral amendment is agreed. I call Mr. Alexander Mereshko to support Amendment 10. You have 30 seconds, Mr. Mereshko. seems he's not here. You can. Okay. Mr. Goncharenko, please.
Thank you very much. This is a very important amendment number 10, which says, recognizes that Vladimir Putin should be held accountable for numerous acts of terror that have been committed against the civilian population. Putin is terrorist. We need to call the spades the spades. We need to say truth, and Putin should be taken to responsibility for what he did against humanity and against Ukrainians. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I see no one. The committee has not been able to consider the amendment, so I will give the floor to the rapporteur.
Thank you. As the wording now is in line with the previous text that Assembly has stated, Russia is a state sponsor of terrorism, so I can accept this formulation.
Thank you, Madam Rapporteur. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. So I see the amendment 10 is agreed. I call Mr. Oleksiy Goncharenko to support Amendment 2. You have 30 seconds, Mr. Goncharenko.
Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, this is a very important amendment because it's saying the most important thing. Oh, sorry. Excuse me. Thank you very much. Dear colleagues, this is a very important amendment because we can, with you, accept hundreds of resolutions, thousands of resolutions, millions of resolutions. Unfortunately, against Putin, against dictators, it doesn't work. They can't be stopped by papers and by resolutions. They only can be stopped by force. So this resolution is saying that the Europe member states should prepare themselves, invest in their defense, and be able to stop the evil. Thank you.
Thank you, Oleksiy. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I see no one. What is the opinion of the committee on the amendment? Please, Mr. Buix.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam President. This amendment was carried by a broad majority.
Merci, Monsieur Buix. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. I see the amendment 2 is agreed. I call Mr. Oleksiy Goncharenko to support amendment 3. You have 30 seconds, sir.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. This is a very important amendment too, because we are speaking about targeted sanctions, and not just against Putin is terrorist. Putin should be liquidated. It's clear everything about this. But the question is, what about those who are around him? They should take their responsibility. These so-called elites, these Russian tycoons, these Russian people who are just pockets of Putin and who are investing and earning huge money on blood. So this is about this. Please support.
Thank you, Mr. Goncharenko. I have been informed that Mr. George Papandreou wishes to propose an oral sub-amendment to Amendment 3 as follows. After the words benefit from the war, add or are involved in the deportation, forcible transfer, and unjustifiable delay in the repatriation of Ukrainian children, civilians, and prisoners of war. In my opinion, the oral sub-amendment is in order under our rules. However, do 10 or more members object to the oral sub-amendment being debated? I see no one. Does anyone wish to speak against the oral sub-amendment? I see no one. The committee unanimously accepted this oral sub-amendment. I will now put the oral sub-amendment to the vote. The vote is open. Closed. The vote is closed, and I call for the results to be displayed. The sub-amendment is agreed. We will now consider the main amendment. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I see no one. The committee unanimously accepted the amendment as amended. I shall now put the amendment as amended to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed, and I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 3, as amended, is agreed. I call Ms. Olena Homenko to support Amendment 7. You have 30 seconds, Madam Homenko. Amendment 7, Madam Homenko.
Excuse me, Madam President. Amendment 7 it speaks of itself. We propose to add other economic actors, because not only secondary sanctions should be applied against third countries facilitating sanctions circumvention, but also economic actors who are involved in this. This is very obvious. Thank you, Madam President.
Sorry. Thank you, Madam Homenko. Does anyone wish to speak against the amendment? I see no one. What is the opinion of the committee on the amendment? Please, Mr. Bouy.
It was approved by a large majority. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup. I shall now put the amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. Amendment 7 is agreed. Dear colleagues, I have received an oral amendment from Ms. Kumpula-Natri which reads as follows. At the beginning of paragraph 10.5, replace the word continue negotiations with finalize negotiations. The President may accept an oral amendment on the grounds of promoting clarity, accuracy or conciliation, and if there is not opposition from 10 or more members to it being debated. In my opinion, the oral amendment meets the criteria of Rule 34.7a. Is there any opposition to the amendment being debated? I see no one. That is the case. We will therefore proceed to the next amendment. That is not, sorry? Oh, sorry. That is not the case. I therefore call Ms. Kumpula-Natri to support the oral amendment. You have 30 seconds, Madam.
Thank you. As also our Secretary General here confirmed, this Organization Council of Europe is ready to establish and it's willing to finalize. Political will, knowledge, experience is there and we need it, so it improves and better describes the will of today that we want to finalize and establish special tribunal to make criminals accountable.
Thank you so much. Does anyone wish to speak against the oral amendment? I see no one. The committee unanimously accepted this oral amendment. I shall now put the oral amendment to the vote. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The oral amendment is agreed. Dear colleagues, we will now proceed to vote on the draft resolution contained in document 16-106. A simple majority is required. The vote is open. The vote is closed. I call for the result to be displayed. The draft resolution in document 16-106 is adopted. Congratulations, Madam Rapporteur. Dear colleagues, the Assembly will hold its next public sitting this afternoon at 4 p.m. with the agenda approved on Monday. The sitting is adjourned.